In the shadows of Japan's history, the Yakuza emerged as more than just criminals. They became a parallel society. Their roots stretched deep into the soil of a nation in turmoil, where poverty and desperation bred a new kind of order, one forged not by law, but by loyalty, violence, and ambition. But at the heart of this empire were men and women whose stories would shape the destiny of the Yamaguchi-gumi, each driven by their own demons, dreams, and codes of honor. To understand their rise, we must first step into the world that gave birth to them, a world of hunger, hope, and their relentless struggle for survival. In the early 20th century, Japan was a nation in flux. The old feudal order had crumbled, replaced by rapid modernization and the chaos of urban life. The streets of Kobe, once quiet, now pulsed with the energy of change. Steam trains rattled past wooden houses, neon signs flickered above muddy alleys, and the scent of the sea mixed with the smoke of industry. Amidst this upheaval, the Yamaguchi-gumi was born, a brotherhood that would soon become the most powerful criminal empire in Japanese history. But it was the vision and will of its founder, Harukichi Yamaguchi, that set the course for everything to come. The story of the Yamaguchi-gumi begins on the muddy docks of Kobe, where men toiled for meager wages and survival was a daily struggle. Here, Harukichi Yamaguchi, a dockworker's son with a sharp mind and a burning sense of injustice, saw opportunity in chaos. Orphaned young, Harukichi learned to fight for every scrap, his fists and wits his only weapons. He watched his mother beg for rice, his friends disappear into the underworld, and he swore he would never be powerless again. Driven by a fierce loyalty to those who had nothing, Harukichi became a protector, first of his fellow laborers, then of the entire underclass of Kobe. He was a man of contradictions, ruthless in business, yet capable of great kindness, feared by rivals, yet beloved by those he shielded from harm. His eyes, always scanning the horizon, saw not just the misery of the present, but the possibility of a new order, one where the weak could find strength in unity. At Harukichi's side stood his most trusted lieutenant, Masaru, the Ox Takeda, a giant of a man with a gentle heart, whose loyalty was matched only by his ferocity in battle. Masaru had once been a sumo wrestler, cast out after a scandal, and found purpose in the brotherhood Harukichi offered. He became the enforcer, the shield, and the hammer of the Yamaguchi-gumi, feared by enemies but beloved by the children he secretly fed in the slums. Masaru's story was one of redemption, a man who had lost everything, but found a new family in the chaos of Kobe's underworld. His massive frame was both a weapon and a comfort, his laughter booming through the alleys, his fists settling disputes that words could not. Yet beneath the surface, Masaru carried scars, memories of betrayal, of dreams shattered, of a world that had cast him aside. In Harukichi, he found not just a leader, but a brother, a bond forged in hardship, tested in blood. But the Yamaguchi-gumi's rise was not just the work of muscle and might. In the shadows, Keiko Sato, the enigmatic mistress of secrets, wove a web of information and alliances. Once a geisha, Keiko had seen the hypocrisy of the powerful up close. She used her charm and intelligence to gather secrets from politicians, police, and businessmen, trading favors and blackmail for the gang's benefit. Her motivations were complex, a longing for respect, a thirst for vengeance against those who had wronged her, and a genuine belief that the Yamaguchi-gumi could protect the powerless where the law had failed. Keiko's world was one of whispered conversations, hidden glances, and coded messages. She moved through the city like a shadow, her kimono rustling softly as she slipped from one world to the next. To the men of power, she was a mystery. To the women of the slums, a silent guardian. Her loyalty to Harukichi was unshakable, forged in the fires of shared struggle and mutual respect. Among the ranks was also Shunji Nakamoto, the strategist, a former law student whose dreams of justice were shattered by corruption. Disillusioned, Shunji turned his legal mind to the service of the Yamaguchi-gumi, crafting schemes that outwitted rivals and kept the police at bay. He saw the gang as a necessary evil, a force that could impose order where the state had failed. His motivations were tinged with regret, but also with a cold pragmatism. He would do whatever it took to ensure the survival of his new family. Shunji's mind was a labyrinth, his plans intricate and precise. He kept meticulous records, studied the law as both shield and sword, and never forgot the lessons of his past. To his comrades, he was a voice of reason. To his enemies, an invisible hand guiding their downfall. Yet in quiet moments, Shunji wondered if he had traded one form of corruption for another, if the order he built was worth the price he paid. This core of unforgettable characters, Harukichi, the visionary, Masaru, the loyal enforcer, Keiko, the mistress of secrets, and Shunji, the strategist, formed the beating heart of the Yamaguchi-gumi, Their strengths and flaws, their ambitions and fears, would shape the destiny of the gang and the fate of all who crossed their path. They ruled through fear, but also through a twisted sense of honor and responsibility, binding their members with unbreakable loyalty. Each night, as the city's lights flickered on, the Yamaguchi-gumi gathered in secret, sharing sake, swearing oaths, and planning their next move. Their rituals were ancient, their codes strict, but their world was always changing. New threats, new opportunities, new betrayals lurking in every shadow. We'll trace their rise from the slums of Kobe, through their explosive post-war growth, to their eventual decline. The Yamaguchi-gumi story is inseparable from the story of modern Japan, a tale of ambition, violence, and the search for identity in a rapidly changing world. As the nation rebuilt from the ashes of war, the gang found new opportunities: smuggling, gambling, protection rackets, and more. They became both villains and heroes, feared by the powerful, relied upon by the desperate. Their influence seeped into every corner of society, politics, business, even the police. Yet for all the power, the Yamaguchi-gumi remained haunted by the ghosts of their past, by the poverty and pain that had forged them, by the choices that could never be undone. This is the story of how a criminal dynasty became a shadow empire, and what it cost Japan. Their influence would touch every corner of society, leaving a legacy of both fear and fascination. For every act of violence, there was an act of charity. For every betrayal, a moment of loyalty. The Yamaguchi-gumi were both a symptom and a cause, a reflection of a nation's wounds, and a force that shaped its destiny. Their story is not just one of crime, but of survival, ambition, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. Let's begin where it all started, the muddy docks of Kobe. In the grit and chaos of this port city, a legend was born. This is the rise of the Yamaguchi-gumi. Their journey is a mirror to Japan's own, a story of darkness and light, of hope and despair, of the unbreakable bonds that can form in the most unlikely of places. In the early 20th century, Kobe's docks were a world unto themselves, a place where sweat, desperation, and ambition collided beneath the shadow of looming cargo ships. Amidst this chaos, a sharp-eyed dockworker named Harukichi Yamaguchi saw not just hardship, but a chance to carve out his own destiny. Yamaguchi began as a humble labor contractor, offering more than just jobs. He promised protection, stability, and a sense of order to men who had none. His charisma was magnetic, his ruthlessness legendary. Outcasts, drifters, and the desperate flocked to him, drawn by the promise of belonging and purpose. Yamaguchi established a strict hierarchy, with himself as Oyabun, the revered father, and his men as Kobun, loyal children bound by unbreakable ties. This was no ordinary business arrangement. It was a sacred pact, modeled after the ancient code of the samurai, where loyalty was absolute and betrayal unthinkable. Under Yamaguchi's iron will, the gang's discipline and unity set them apart. Ordinary dockworkers were transformed into a formidable brotherhood, feared and respected across Kobe. Their ambitions grew. From controlling labor rackets, the Yamaguchi-gumi expanded into gambling and the bustling entertainment districts, always searching for new ways to profit from the city's restless energy. By 1915, the Yamaguchi-gumi was no longer just a gang. It was a dynasty, formally established and built on a foundation of loyalty, violence, and relentless ambition. The groundwork was laid for an empire that would one day rule Japan's underworld, its roots deep in the mud and blood of Kobe's docks. As dawn broke over the port, a new power was rising, one that would shape the fate of countless lives. The rules were simple, but absolute: loyalty above all else, and opportunity for those bold enough to seize it. In the crucible of Kobe's docks, the Yamaguchi-gumi was born, an organization forged by hardship, bound by honor, and destined to leave its mark on history. The Yamaguchi-gumi's strength came from more than hierarchy. It was forged in ritual and pain. In the shadowy world of Japan's underworld, power was not simply inherited or seized. It was earned, tested, and proven through acts that bound men together in ways outsiders could scarcely imagine. Full-body tattoos, or irizumi, marked members for life, their elaborate designs a badge of endurance and loyalty. These weren't just decorations. They were living testaments to a man's courage, his ability to withstand excruciating pain, and his unwavering commitment to the brotherhood. The agony of the needle was a test. Only the committed could bear it. The process could take years, with each session lasting hours, the pain relentless. For many, the tattoo became a second skin, a shield against the outside world, and a symbol of belonging that could never be erased. Another ritual, yubitsume, demanded a fingertip as atonement for failure, a brutal reminder of loyalty and consequence. If a member made a grave mistake or disrespected the code, he would be expected to sever the tip of his own finger, presenting it to his superior as a wordless apology. Each missing digit told a story of mistakes and forgiveness, binding members closer to the group. The pain was real, but so was the message. Loyalty to the family came before all else, and redemption was possible, but never easy. The Sakazuki Goto ceremony sealed new recruits with shared sake, creating a father-son bond stronger than any contract. In this ritual, the Oyabun or boss and the Kobun or subordinate would drink from the same cup, symbolizing a relationship of absolute trust and mutual obligation. These traditions transformed individuals into a brotherhood, united by pain, symbolism, and absolute obedience. The rituals were not just acts, they were the glue that held the organization together, forging bonds that could withstand betrayal, hardship, and even death. Tattoos made them instantly recognizable, while yubitsume enforced discipline. In public baths, the ink was a silent warning. These were meant not to be crossed. The missing fingers, meanwhile, were a constant reminder of the price of failure. The rituals weren't just for show. They created an unbreakable internal structure. Every member knew his place, his duties, and the consequences of stepping out of line. This order was enforced not just by fear, but by a deep sense of honor and belonging. Loyalty was everything. Betrayal was unthinkable. To turn your back on the family was to lose your identity, your protection, and your honor, sometimes even your life. Through these rites, the Yamaguchi-gumi became more than a gang. They became a family. Members looked out for one another, shared fortunes and failures, and stood united against the outside world. Their discipline and unity fueled their rise. As their reputation grew, so did their influence, spreading from the streets of Kobe to every corner of Japan and beyond. In the world of the Yakuza, pain was the price of belonging. Every scar, every missing finger, every drop of ink told a story of sacrifice, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds that made the Yamaguchi-gumi a force to be reckoned with. In this world, brotherhood was everything, and the rituals that forged it were as enduring as steel. In the aftermath of World War II, Japan was a nation brought to its knees. Cities lay in ruins, their once bustling streets reduced to rubble and ash. The old order had collapsed, and in its place was a void, one filled with uncertainty, desperation, and hunger. But for the Yakuza, chaos meant opportunity. As ordinary people struggled to survive, the underworld saw a chance to rise from the ashes and seize power in the shadows. At the center of this transformation was Kazuo Taoka, a man who would become known as the Godfather of Godfathers. With a keen sense for power and organization, Taoka took the helm of the Yamaguchi-gumi and steered it into a new era. He recruited ex-soldiers, men hardened by war and left with no place in the new Japan, as well as the unemployed and desperate. Together, they seized control of the black markets that sprang up in every city, trading in everything from food and fuel to cigarettes and stolen goods. As Japan began the long process of rebuilding, the Yamaguchi-gumi moved swiftly into construction. They offered protection, controlled labor, and took a cut from every project. In the chaos of reconstruction, their influence grew with every brick laid and every yen exchanged. Under Taoka's leadership, the gang transformed from a loose collection of street toughs into a criminal conglomerate. Meetings became more formal, hierarchies more rigid, and their ambitions far greater. The Yamaguchi-gumi began to blend illegal rackets with legitimate businesses. They invested in nightclubs, restaurants, and entertainment venues, using these as both fronts for their operations and as sources of real profit. Every member was required to have a legal front, a shop, a bar, a restaurant, something to mask their true activities. The line between crime and commerce blurred until it was almost invisible. In these shadowy spaces, deals were struck, money changed hands, and the Yamaguchi-gumi's grip on the city tightened. The gang's reach extended into every corner of daily life, from the markets to the nightclubs, from the construction sites to the police stations. By night, the Yamaguchi-gumi became the unofficial regulators of the city's entertainment districts. They offered protection to businesses, enforced their own rules, and operated openly, sometimes more openly than the authorities themselves. Their power was so entrenched that even the police often looked the other way. Some officers were bribed, others intimidated, and many simply overwhelmed by the gang's sheer presence. The Yamaguchi-gumi's confidence was such that they even held press conferences, presenting themselves as a necessary part of society, guardians of order in a chaotic world. By the 1960s, the Yamaguchi-gumi had become a parallel government. Their headquarters stood as a symbol of their power, an institution as formidable as any in Japan. They provided order where the state could not, mediating disputes, enforcing contracts, and maintaining a kind of peace, albeit one enforced by fear and violence. The Yamaguchi-gumi was no longer just a gang. It was an institution, a shadow empire whose influence seemed unstoppable. In the vacuum left by war, they had risen to become the new kings of Japan's underworld, shaping the nation's future from the darkness. The Yamaguchi-gumi's reach extended far beyond crime, deep into the very heart of Japanese society, touching politics, law enforcement, and even the world of entertainment. Their influence was not just felt in the underworld, but in the corridors of power and the everyday lives of ordinary people. After World War II, as Japan struggled to rebuild, American intelligence agencies saw the Yakuza as a useful tool, a bulwark against the spread of communism. In secret, they offered support to Yakuza leaders and their political allies, hoping to stabilize the country and keep leftist movements at bay. The Yakuza, in turn, became deeply entwined with conservative politicians. They acted as bodyguards, vote gatherers, and enforcers, ensuring that their chosen candidates won elections and that rivals were kept in check. In exchange, they received protection, lucrative contracts, and a seat at the table of power. Their ties to the ruling party granted them a kind of political immunity. The line between law and crime became dangerously blurred, as police and politicians often looked the other way, or even collaborated with the syndicate. The Yamaguchi-gumi's influence didn't stop at politics. In the world of entertainment, they managed talent, financed films, and shaped public opinion. Through movies and television, they often romanticized their own image, portraying themselves as noble outlaws, protectors of the weak, and keepers of an ancient code. For many Japanese, the Yakuza were seen as a necessary evil. They kept order in the streets, mediated disputes, and sometimes even provided aid during times of crisis. Their presence was both feared and in some ways respected. As long as you stayed out of their business, they left you alone. For the average citizen, the Yakuza were a distant, shadowy presence, one that could be ignored if you followed the unspoken rules. This public tolerance, combined with deep connections in politics and business, made the Yamaguchi-gumi nearly untouchable. They operated in plain sight, their power reinforced by a web of favors, secrets, and silent agreements. Over time, the Yamaguchi-gumi became woven into the very fabric of Japanese society. Their influence touched every level, from the highest offices of government to the smallest neighborhood shops. For decades, they were not just criminals, they were a shadow institution, operating alongside the official structures of power. Their presence was felt everywhere, yet rarely spoken of openly. But shadows can't last forever. As Japan modernized and the world changed, the Yamaguchi-gumi's grip began to loosen. The same secrecy and power that once protected them would eventually become their greatest vulnerability. The Yamaguchi-gumi's golden age ended not with a whimper, but with a storm of violence and a slow, painful decline. For decades, they had ruled the underworld with an iron fist, their influence stretching from the neon-lit streets of Kobe to the highest echelons of Japanese society. But as the 1980s drew to a close, the empire began to fracture. After the death of their legendary boss, Kazuo Taoka, a brutal succession war erupted. Factions within the syndicate vied for power, and the streets of Japan became battlegrounds. Gunfire echoed through quiet neighborhoods, and the public, once accustomed to the Yakuza's code of silence, was suddenly thrust into the chaos. The myth of the honorable outlaw, romanticized in film and folklore, was shattered by daylight gunfights and innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. The violence was no longer hidden in the shadows. It was broadcast on the evening news, and fear gripped the nation. Public outrage swelled. Ordinary citizens, once resigned to the Yakuza's presence, now demanded action. The government, under mounting pressure, could no longer turn a blind eye. In 1992, the government struck back with the Anti-Boryokudan Act, a sweeping law that made Yakuza activities illegal and for the first time held bosses accountable for the crimes of their underlings. The act was a turning point, crippling the syndicate's operations and sending shockwaves through the criminal underworld. At the same time, Japan's economic bubble burst. The recession hit hard, drying up the Yakuza's revenue streams and shattering their aura of invincibility. Legitimate businesses once controlled by the syndicate closed their doors, and the flow of money slowed to a trickle. Membership plummeted. The once mighty Yamaguchi-gumi, 40,000 strong at its peak, began to splinter under relentless pressure from law enforcement and economic hardship. Many members turned themselves in, while others simply disappeared, leaving behind empty offices and shattered dreams. The Yamaguchi-gumi's legacy, once a source of fear and fascination, began to fade into memory. Their rituals, their tattoos, their secret codes, remnants of a bygone era, now little more than shadows on the walls of empty meeting rooms. Yet the story of the Yamaguchi-gumi is more than just a tale of crime. It is a warning, a stark reminder of what happens when the boundaries between crime and politics blur. The consequences, as Japan learned, are lasting and severe. Japan's struggle to uproot the Yakuza has shown just how deeply organized crime can embed itself in the fabric of society. Even as the syndicate's power waned, its influence lingered in unexpected places: business, politics, and the lives of ordinary people. The cost of tolerating such power is always higher than it seems. Behind every headline, there are real victims, families torn apart, lives forever changed, and communities left to pick up the pieces. Even now, the shadow of the Yamaguchi-gumi lingers. In the quiet corners of Japanese cities, in the stories whispered by old-timers, their presence is still felt, a haunting reminder of what happens when the line between law and crime disappears. The empire that once ruled the shadows is fading, brick by brick, memory by memory. But the legacy of the Yamaguchi-gumi endures, etched into the history of Japan and into the cautionary tales told to future generations. Their rise and fall is a story of power, ambition, and the high price of letting darkness thrive in the heart of society.